Welcome, everyone, to the Academic Careers Research Culture in Africa webinar that is sponsored by two organizations. One I'm involved in, which is Africa Academy of Management. My name is Benson Honig. And the other organization is Global Business School Network. So these are the two sponsors that are organizing this amazing panel. And I'm going to introduce, if I can, the panelists. And before I do that, I do want to thank the amazing people that have organized this for us. That includes Julie Nyanjom, Bella Galpern, and Emma Martins. Without those three amazing people, we wouldn't have this webinar, and I hope you all appreciate it. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Dan LeClaire. He is CEO of the Global Business School Network. Prior to being CEO, Dan was Executive Vice President of AACSB, which is the major accreditation organization for business schools around the world. His experience at AACSB includes 2.5 years as Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, 7 years as Chief Operating Officer, and 5 years as Chief Knowledge Officer. And Dan has a PhD from the University of Florida on game theory. The game theory has got to be useful for the gaming he does in accreditation. So, Dan, thanks for joining with us. The next panelist I'll introduce is Olaf Brunings. I've known Olaf for quite a long time. He's Academic Director of International Development Collaboration and Associate Professor of Business Administration at Jönköping International Business School, where he runs an amazing program providing doctoral education to graduate students in Africa. It's an extraordinary program. Olaf his research interests in the area of strategic management, corporate heritage, organizational identity and self-understanding, corporate governance, family business, and social memory in organizations. He manages development collaboration projects with universities in sub-Saharan Africa, where he's involved in several research projects in entrepreneurship and strategic management. And Olaf is a very well-cited scholar. He's got over 1,700 citations to his name. And last but not least, I'll introduce Dr. Teresa Buscara. She's a lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam Business School in the Department of Finance. She holds a PhD in business administration research on business financing, innovation, entrepreneurship, and sustainable tourism. Her expertise and experience is also in business management and value co-creation. So with that, I look forward to a really interesting, fabulous, dynamic webinar. Thank you, all three of you, for your contributions, and I turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Benson. We appreciate those kind remarks and what a great introduction to the three of us on the panel. I actually serve in most of my capacities on these types of events. I'm a moderator, but I think most of you also have figured out that I also like to be a contributor at times. So perhaps you'll see a bit of that during this webinar. And our topic today, which, I think in many ways is central to the work of not only AFAM, but also the Global Business School Network, is about not only about research, but about researchers, which are obviously critical to this whole thing. And as we've noted in the description, the number of PhDs in Africa and held by Africans, I should say, is very important, is increasing. And I think that reflects the aspirations of institutions on the continent. But the question then becomes, are the systems and cultures adapting in ways to support PhDs who are interested in research that's relevant and impactful? And how can we begin to connect the dots on that and align the systems to the needs of the researchers, and vice versa, align the researchers to the needs of the system which are driven by many factors, as we know. So that's our discussion today is about academic careers. It's about the systems in which researchers operate, and in particular focus on the PhDs within business. I'm not going to talk any further because we want to get things started by going to Olaf, because one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar, I think, stems from conversations Olaf, you and me have had over the years, and in particular, some work that you and your colleagues have been doing at Jönköping, at JIBS, the Jönköping International Business School, to support research development in sub-Saharan Africa. And historically, Sweden's been involved with this for many, many years, the way I understand it, for 35 years, especially with something called the sandwich model for PhD education. Can you tell us a little bit about this model, about this work on the sandwich programs? And I know you'll want to continue beyond that, because that's the point of our discussion. But let's just introduce ourselves to the kind of work that Sweden and you and your colleagues have done on the continent.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you, Benson, also for the nice introduction. Well, the sandwich model has been around for a long time. At some places, actually, Sweden has been involved for more than 40 years already in African universities. And the sandwich model is basically about a scholarship for doctoral students that are enrolled in a Swedish university. So there are African doctoral students that get a position at a Swedish university. The scholarship covers their courses, their housing, their living expenses. And it's called sandwich model because it's basically two parts. The students are taking their courses in Sweden, usually with a Swedish supervisor and a local supervisor involved from their home university. And once they have finalized their courses, they go back to their home country and do their data collection and write up their thesis. And the thesis is then finally defended at the Swedish university. So they get a Swedish degree. And more recently, then the Swedish development aid has been moving a little bit towards other methods, but maybe we get into that later.
Yeah, let me test my understanding, Olaf, if you could respond to this. The sort of the theory of change, right? So if we're talking about Swedish government and their involvement with international development, what's the theory behind supporting PhD education, that it would improve research skills, enable researchers to publish articles? How does this work? The mechanism.
The Swedish state, the Swedish government, and our development collaboration agency SIDA have focused a lot on research related projects when it comes to higher education. So while other contributors have been focusing more on perhaps primary schools, secondary schools, basic university education, Sweden has been focusing a lot on research, because there has been the idea that in order to be a competitive academic environment, you need to have your own researchers. And the idea behind the sandwich model is essentially that students are equipped to become good researchers. And once they have done their doctoral program, once they have their PhD, they go back to their home country and bring this knowledge with them, and in a positive sense, then contaminate the environment that they are getting into, and are able to support their colleagues into becoming researchers, that they can also supervise the next generation of doctoral students, and that they basically are the ones, the missionaries, who are spreading the gospel of good research in their own environment.
Yeah, so it's not just the scholarship recipients that are publishing more, but it's the idea that they could also help others, which is
right.
Interesting. We'll come back to in a second. But Teresa, I want want you to join us in this conversation right away, because how did you meet Olaf? What is the connection? And then let's explore then your work as part of this ongoing work by Sweden and by JIBS. So how did you meet Olaf? Was this at an AFAM meeting? Oops, Teresa, you're muted.
Thank you, Dan, for the introduction and the good question that were posed to know how did I meet Olaf. Well, it's just an interesting that as a young scholar, after I finished my PhD, I think it was when that I was now trying to build up the capacities on writing and publishing. So I met Olaf in 2021 in a conference, in a research workshop, which was organized by JIBS and other partners, but it was conducted in Mozambique. So it was in March and April, this conference was conducted, and it's where we met. So it is through that ambition and the motivation towards growing up in research is where I met all of the JIBS team and other scholars from African countries as well.
Now, this event in Mozambique, the way I understand it, you played a role in helping to organize as well, did you not? Yeah.
So after the Mozambique conference, now it was like the next workshop has to be in Uganda, and something happened. Then it was like after the meeting when that we were trying to organize, then I said, okay, we can do it in Dar es Salaam. There's no any harm. I can lead the team and we can coordinate this. So we discussed and finally we agreed among the universities, and that it was last year in February that we had the research workshop that was named as Entrepreneurship and Innovation for Development, with the theme that was going with bridging the societies together for sustainable development in Eastern Africa. So it was a successful project, research workshop that was conducted, and everything went well. We had a good number of papers, participants from many of African countries, Uganda, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Sweden, and many other also as well, and many papers were presented. So my motivation or my ability to participate in the previous one in Mozambique, and that I could see how the young scholars could contribute from these kind of opportunities, then I thought it was a high time now to bring it also in my home country, since the opportunity was there, so that the young scholars and other scholars can as well take part in the research and have the platforms to present their papers, which was successful done.
That sounds very successful, and especially given the different contexts in which the work was being done. I want to go back to Olaf. Teresa, I want to hold you off for a minute. That you explained the motivation, and I see how the connection starts to evolve. And I want to go back now to Olaf, and then I want to come back to you, Teresa, to continue this dialogue. But Olaf, you've been involved with this research development for a long time, and I know our conversations have been about the impact of this work. So the sandwich model sounds great, but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how Sweden and you and your colleagues have begun to see this work in context and trying to understand what kind of impact it's made over time. So has it achieved the objectives that it set out to be? Does the model seem to be working when it comes to change?
Well, to some extent, the sandwich model is, of course, very nice. It's a generous model that has graduated many PhDs, but in one sense also it's not really sustainable because in the long run, the African institutions need their own PhD programs. So what is increasingly done now by Sweden in different universities in the Global South is actually moving from the sandwich model and going to national programs at the university, where Swedish professors are involved as supervisors, as instructors on PhD courses, together with their local colleagues, but where the students are enrolled in the local programs. But this is not all. There is also a general challenge that is related to the PhD's ability to continue doing research after their graduation. And we have realized, some colleagues of mine have done some research and followed up PhD processes. Most of the PhDs that have been graduated in these programs have stopped doing research after graduation. So they do not really have any good research opportunities. And there the whole theory of change is under threat, because the whole idea is that we educate researchers to do research, but they are not.
That's interesting, Olaf, and you know, I want to comment on that. But before I do that, I want to hear, Teresa, your perspective on this, because you're excited about this work, right? And in many ways, I think you joined at a stage where we've already begun to realize what's necessary in order to complement the efforts of the sandwich model over time, right? What's that missing ingredient? Can you tell us how your perspective fits vis-a-vis Olaf's perspective from Tanzania?
Yeah, thank you all for the very great contribution. First of all, I should admit that I am also a beneficiary of one of the Sandwich program. I did my PhD in Sandwich. And actually, with Sandwich, you get an opportunity as well to access the resources from the developed partners, but as well, you have an access to your local or your national facilities as well. And with this particular case, with Sandwich programs, we have many people that have graduated because the resources are quite minimal, and many can be able to be facilitated by these programs. So from CIDA, NIDA, DAD, and the NORAD, and many others to mention, many of us, like from the faculty here, we have seen many graduating from this program. But as Olaf said, yes, we need PhD candidates to graduate and continue doing research. Exactly what Olaf said, it's true that after completing and finishing the PhD journey, thereafter, we still have challenges on how to be continuously doing research. There are a number of factors that will lead to this, but one to mention that goes along with what Olaf has said is there's lack of that research mentorship and the research coaching that needs to be done, because after you have just graduated, that's not all enough. You still need some more assistance, the coaching on how to go together and make sure that the journey is taking steps by steps. So lack of these, like, yes, we have completed with a few papers, but how then do I progress with researching, given these kind of obstacles, again, plus the challenges that we have? So if you allow me, I would go ahead maybe mentioning some of a few challenges that we have, like we face a challenge on workload. We teach classes, we have teaching, research, and consultancy. Then when it comes to teaching, then you find that after you graduate, you're given, you're coming back now to teaching, and you feel that without knowing or realizing, you have a very huge workload behind you. And with this particular, then you can feel that there is that lack of time, because you need to concentrate to do research, then balance as well research and teaching. But finally find that teaching takes a lot of time, because you have huge classes, 500, let's say, of students, and even some of large classes. So this could also mean to be one of the obstacles hindering the research taking journey to very young PhD scholars. But again, as I said, there are other obstacles and issues that could come along after PhD. Let's say one is given administrative tasks, and this also blocks on the way, like administration takes a lot of time. And plus the research, plus the teaching, administrative issues, then it's like you have so many roles on the table, and it becomes hard. And if 1 year passes, the second year goes around, then issues like you tend to forget, and it's not even easy to come back. So just maybe we can go on with this, but let me end here, then I'll mention some other as we keep on discussing.
Yeah. That's great, Theresia. I'm starting to understand sort of the breadth of things and how they're connected between yours and Olaf's description about how, PhDs sort of fit the context and the systems and the culture as we want to discuss. And, you made the remark about administration, and this is one thing that I've heard about similar programs, for example, where the US is supporting PhD education in Latin America and sort of north-south kind of context, that PhDs were so scarce, but so valued in some sense that they became immediately deans after earning their PhD. Even at a young age, they became deans. And of course, when you're a dean, your administrative work dominates, and it's very hard to do your own publishing, much less mentor other scholars and create a research culture given the balance. But I want to now ask both of you. I think this is an opportunity now to really get into the crux of the matter. And when I think of business in general, not just business education, when you think of business and you think about strategy and you think about culture, culture is sort of a catch-all in some sense that includes not only the written systems, how much you're supposed to teach, how much you're supposed to do research, how much you're supposed to do the consulting in your case, but it captures also the unwritten, right? The dimensions, the unwritten rules, the norms, so to speak, of how faculty members and the rest of the community behave. But when I think about strategy and culture, and you've heard the expression, culture eats strategy for lunch, right? It's sort of, the best strategy, if you don't shift the culture, isn't very effective, right? On the other hand, some would argue that the culture shift without the support of strategy doesn't matter. So when you think about the ambitions of African institutions and you map that against the research cultures that might or might not support that, I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Now, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about, and you both started us by talking about some of the obstacles, but how do you begin to change the research culture or shift the research culture in a university or in a business school? What kinds of things, besides, of course, the sandwich program is designed specifically to eventually do that, but there must be some obstacles, some things that we should be thinking about in addition to that. And then, by the way, I'm also paying attention to the questions, and I think I see some opportunities to weave in some of those questions as we go. So thank you all for posting them on the Q&A, and also I'll be following the chat. But Olaf, why don't you start us off with this question about changing, how do we begin to shift the research culture?
Yeah, I mean, that is of course a very important challenge. And I think one thing that is important to recognize is that culture is about many people. It's not just about a few PhDs that come into an organization and that are still quite junior and supposed to change everything, but it needs to be rather broad. And as an idea to be broad and to involve more people into research activities, we have thought that it might be a good idea to provide stepping stones towards becoming a researcher. I mean, it's a huge challenge to go for publishing an article in one of the big journals that everyone dreams of publishing in. So maybe you need other methods to become acquainted with research and to get used to doing research. And the workshop that Theresia was mentioning here in the beginning, that is such a stepping stone that together with our African partners, we have tried to provide, because with a research workshop, you can submit work in progress. You don't need to have a PhD. You can, I mean, there are many good colleagues who have master's degrees who are working at our African partner universities. You can come with a master's degree, maybe use your thesis, submit a paper based on your thesis, or you can collect new data and start writing a new paper. And doing that by arranging now 2 workshops in Eastern Africa and a number of conferences, we have tried to provide the opportunity for quite many colleagues to start doing research and to continue doing research after their most recent degree. And I think that these realistic small stepping stones, they can be a way towards then later submitting to a large international conference, submitting to a journal, and so on and so forth.
I like that, and I've heard that often about culture change. When you talk about culture change, this idea that you can change it all at once, right, is out the door, right? You need to develop these stepping stones. I think that's great, and young scholars especially need to not only continue developing, but maintaining those connections across institutions and borders that enable the kinds of contributions that make sense. Which I'm going to come back to that actually at some point, because at some point you also want to begin to question, are we seeking the right objectives in some sense when it comes to PhD education, when it comes to getting the research done in ways that matter to Africa by Africans. So Theresia, how have you seen institutions, perhaps you can use your own institution as an example, and the kinds of things that we're doing to understand culture change, to develop a stronger research focus in a context which is valued, as you pointed out, teaching with large classes, consulting, as well as research.
Yeah, as well said by Olof, in our context, culture, the research culture actually has been diminishing. And there's a way that our schools or business schools or any other schools that if we need to raise up now the bars in terms of research, doing research, upgrading the young scholars, that should be internal efforts that need to be conducted or need to be adapted by everyone that is in place. For instance, like Olof said about the workshop that allows at least work in progress and things like that before you go to the top journals. So it could also be like, for instance, in our case is the business school started like little by little setting aside funds that could be used for research activities. And in this particular fund, it's like you find out that we need to have teams that are diverse, like we need to have seniors, we need to have professors and young researchers as well in the teams. So with this kind of initiatives, like providing the research funds, internal research funds, less depending on the development partners, this would also create now our own way of coming back and feel that doing research is our own responsibility, and we have to set aside funds that could also support this. And in doing this, that means we can be in a place to do research in the areas that we are interested in based on our context. For instance, when you get the funds from the development partners, that means normally we get funds with the areas of interest from the partners. So if we set aside our own funds, that means we are flexible on doing research based on our own research themes, based on our context. And in this particular case, that means we will be able to contribute to our own environment, solving the solutions that are quite very related to the problems that we have, and this could arise and bring forward the use of the findings that we are doing research, and they could be used in the industry. So it's like providing the baby steps. How should we start from our own initiatives, but as well from the regional perspective? How are we collaborating with our own universities in terms of research? So participating in other conferences in the nearby regions, this could also give an opportunity to learn from one another, and as well to share the knowledge within the region, the context as well, so that it could build that particular relationship, the network between the partners and the region universities. And with these networks, the collaboration that you are giving from, let's say, Mozambique, Nairobi, Kenya, Uganda, and so, you create a network of scholars that are able to work together. And in this particular case, that means you have something that you can do it over time, and we can reach the high bars at the end of the day.
Thanks for that, Teresa. You point to several points. One thing I wanted to come back to, and you've already been able to start addressing that, is a couple of the questions related to funding, and its alignment with the needs of the countries in Africa, but also the African continent. And then continuing, you and Olaf sort of thinking about these stepping stones and building the networks as well as the steps for individual scholars is really important in developing this cultural dimension. Now, I want to pick up on that funding question, and I think Teresa, your angle on this is critical, and I'm going to take the same angle. Not just in Africa, in fact, globally. Business scholars, researchers have come under some criticism. There's some tension between what they, I guess, the needs of society and the focus of the research. And this takes a lot of different forms. Some would say that business scholars are sometimes so focused on business, but less so on the business in the context of society. Some would say that the structures in our industry produce research that is not very relevant and impactful for the context in which we're examining. And we at GBSN, and I know in AFM, and I know all of us, I think on this call, believe that business is contextual and will always be contextual, and that whatever we do, we need to do research that has an impact in the context, is understandable in context. I don't know if I'm getting exactly to the point, but if you could tell me, Olaf, Teresa, your perspectives on this, the alignment of the culture and the expectations of scholars in sub-Saharan Africa against the needs of society. Right. And when I talk about society, I'm talking about the needs of Africa. Right. Let me give you just one more example. At times, our industry is criticized for being such that to publish in the top journals, in some ways, you have to abstract from the context, that you need to do things that are generalizable in different environments, but yet context matters so much in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as everywhere else. I'm going to stop trying to ask this question because I think, Olaf, Teresa, you get it. Olaf, any comments about that, about this alignment between the needs of society and what business schools are trying to do?
I mean, first of all, I would like to say that actually I'm amazed by my African colleagues, be it PhD students or more senior colleagues, like how much interested they are in issues that are have societal relevance. I mean, we have several PhD students who are looking into savings groups, entrepreneurship, self-help groups, and similar things that are doing a great job for developing society. So I think on the side of the African researchers, this is not really a problem. This being said, of course, I mean, as you suggest, we have an institutional environment where our top journals tend to reward theoretical contributions much more than impact in society. And of course, also our African colleagues see that it is like very good for your reputation, for university rankings and other things if you publish in high-ranking journals. So we have very strong institutions in our industry that are a little bit problematic in this respect. Of course, we should have good theoretical contributions, but societal relevance does not always count that much. But the problem is definitely not on the side of the African researchers.
That's interesting. Yeah, Teresa, your comments about that, about this tension, but also about Olaf's both compliment, right, of African researchers, but also this this tension that we might be feeling as African institutions develop more global reputations.
Well, it's not that we need to deny the role of the business school, the universities, when it comes to their role to the society. As whatever that the universities are doing, actually back way for not only to looking at what they are trying to strive as a research institution, higher learning institution in terms of research and the ranking, they need also to abide and serve the society as well. So if I go back and recall from my own university that to some extent, the research that are normally being conducted, they tend to be based on the society, looking at what the society will be and what could be solved from the societies. And in this particular case, we are making such kind of contribution to the society without leaving them apart. For instance, we have some projects that we are conducting research on waste management, and we have been working so close with waste pickers in so many aspects, and they have been involved in our conferences. And in this particular case, you can see that you are trying to bring them on board and they feel to be part of it and they participate. So when it comes to data collection and some of the research activities, you have them on board and it becomes very easy to have their contribution, not only for them, but even other stakeholders that are in place. So if it is this done in various sectors, we could have enough contribution that we could make in the society from different sectors. They say tourism, the banking, and the financial sector as well. And in this particular case, we as researchers, we could have the ranking from practical research to the higher publishing to higher journals that we are trying to get there, though not yet to that much extent, according to our journey so far. So I think that's my take on regarding on how to align the society impact when it comes to research and how the schools or universities could take part in these particular aspects.
Yeah, you know, I appreciate that your perspective on that, and especially you. If I understand correctly, you do quite a bit of research on informal economy, whereas in other parts of the world, formal economy is sort of the big driver, and in Africa, of course, understanding the informal context is extremely important. But I want to press both you and Olaf a little bit further on, I think something, Olaf, you started to hint at, and that is that PhDs and the kind of work that PhDs might do is not the only kind of research that needs to be supportive, right? So theoretically, I think you said theoretical research is important, and I believe that as well. But when we talk about research cultures in, let's say, the United States, often the ones that publish in these highly theoretical or top journals have they're sort of at the top of the game. They're viewed in some ways as superior citizens on campus, right? Whereas others that are doing more practical research, perhaps engaged in research through local labs and things like that, perhaps are perceived as, I'm going to say, second-class citizens at times in the context of a business school. Is that part of our discussion when we talk about research cultures? Should we be thinking about more diverse research scholars in the sense of the kind of skills and connections that they bring, you know, so not just connections with other PhD scholars, but connections with NGOs and governments and things to have local impact? Is that part of our discussion here, or should it be?
I think it should definitely be. And I mean, sometimes when I have discussions with colleagues from universities, it does not have to be Africa, it can also be other contexts that do not yet have these prominent universities or business schools. I meet an expectation that in the global north, we have all the good answers and the solutions, and the goal is to copy us. And of course, that also brings a risk of copying mistakes. And I sometimes hear that partners from universities in other parts of the world, they have understood that to us in the global north, publishing in the top journals, that is highly important. And they repeat this model and say that, okay, our staff also needs to publish in top journals. And I think, yes, it's great if you publish in top journals, but an academic career is not only one track where these highly ranked journals are the only goal that you can reach. I mean, also societal relevance can be highly important, and then it should be rewarded also in an institutional context. And of course, then in one sense, it is important that the local leadership also is to some extent brave and says that yeah, we are going to reward research that makes an impact. And then finally, I would also like to add, I mean, it's of course not a dichotomy where you are either making a societal impact or you publish in a good journal. I mean, I think there is a lot of research around with a strong societal impact that you can translate into a theoretical contribution, and that you can publish in a top journal. And I think now I've been a little bit critical of our journals. Of course, many of our journals also like when you bring data from a very different context and you see things that you would otherwise not see.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, you know, I sense there's an opportunity there, especially in your last comment, in the sense of complementarity, right? And thinking about how the pieces fit together and the kinds of scholars that we develop, not just PhDs, but others that may view research in a different context, more applied and things like that. Teresa, you comments about that, and I want to shift to one of the questions as soon as you're done with that, because I think it opens up a larger question. Teresa?
Yes, very sure. And I like the way Olof has just said it, because he just reminded me of one of the issues that I just came across with. If you look at our African context, when it comes to doing research, it's like the responsibility to conduct research relies to the academic scholars. But as Olof said, this is not all. Research is for everyone. So if we were looking forward to build a research culture within a society, that means we need to look at it in a broader perspective across the whole ecosystem, like the institution. We have the private sector, we have the government, we have the NGOs. Do they really take research as part of the activity, something that will add value within an organization, but across the nation as well? So when I was trying to think about this, then I went back to I thought about the policies that we have. Yes, to the national level, we have the policies that support research. Let's say from the government, it's like the policies, we take 10% of the GDP that is going to be allocated for research. But if you go back and look at this is what the policies say, but how is the implementation at the end of the day? So you look at it like, yes, it is 10%, but the priority when it comes to the allocation of fund, then this comes out with less emphasis. And at the end of the day, that 10% does not go straight for that particular activity. And if it doesn't, that means the research culture that we're talking about, it can hardly be developed. So if we look at research as an aspect that has to measure the university or higher learning institutions levels, like where should they be ranked, we still have a chance, and we still stand a chance that we should take into consideration all the research that are being conducted. Then if we have the chance to publish in high top-ranked journals, then that could be an added advantage, because if you look at the level that we are, publishing in high or the top-ranked journals still is a challenge. So where should we be starting with? So I think starting with what we could afford at the societal level, doing the research that would measure direct impact. And at the end of the day, if we have scholars now who can translate and be able to bring back these research findings to top ranked journals, then that could be something else. But we had a starting point where we could do it and try to bring forward the research culture within ourselves, not only the academic scholars, the PhD, no, but again, with everyone within the private sector, the government, and even the government, the
Right.
NGOs
Sure.
as well.
Yeah, I think that's right in some sense. I think in the, if I could say, in the West or the global North, and more mature markets, you might say, that part of the challenge has been they're stuck in these systems, and these systems haven't yielded the most impactful research or most relevant research for the kinds of things that society needs. And they're trying to change that. And part of that means connecting with NGOs, connecting with government, connecting more strongly with business. And I think in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, we have an opportunity to develop it from the ground level. And I think, like Olaf pointed out, we have an opportunity for us to think about research cultures that are more inclusive, and as a consequence, create different kinds of research that can be valued for the community. But Olaf, you unmuted yourself. I was about to change the subject, so I'm going to let you say what you were going to say before I change the subject.
No, nothing in particular. I just want to make sure that I don't forget to unmute myself when you ask the next question.
Well, thanks for doing that. It happens to me at least once per webinar. I forget to unmute myself. Well, I want to get at this question that was posted a little bit earlier about research. How can researchers be sure their work would not be copied as cross-country laws are different? And I'm gonna elevate that question just a little bit, because I think implicit in all of this discussion is the importance of business management research for society, right? For communities, for business, which is part of society. And nothing, in my view, is more important than than research integrity, right? It has to be, in some sense, independent, right? It has to be well done. That's why PhD education matters, right? Because we want to do good research, not just research that tries to shape opinions, but research that is independent, well done, and in some sense leads to conclusions sometimes that we don't necessarily want to hear, right? But how do we think about research integrity in the context of academic careers, in the context of sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of the world? How important is it? How do we address what I think many of us view as an emerging issue in business education research?
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, our African colleagues are in a context that is characterized by resource scarcity. And in a context with resource scarcity, there is, of course, a temptation to take shortcuts. I think we need to be a bit humble also when we are looking at this situation, that many colleagues are facing huge pressure. Then, of course, I mean, when I look back at my own career, I started my PhD in 1998. the research ethics and integrity landscape look different from now. I mean, it was clear that you were not supposed to plagiarize, but we could not even imagine about artificial intelligence and topics like that. I had never heard of any predatory journals and things like that. So I mean, a lot has been happening, and I think it's important to provide information, and not only information, but also an understanding about these issues. So why are they important, and to continuously talk about them. And of course, we do that a lot when we meet our PhD students, and we try to open up for other faculty when we have seminars on these topics. And I personally think it's very important to understand the logic behind why is it a problem when people, for instance, plagiarize. Why is it a problem to publish in a predatory journal? Well, it's not just because someone says this is forbidden, but it creates a lot of other problems for our industry, for the development of knowledge, and finally for society.
Teresa?
Yes, I was just trying to listen very carefully what Olaf said, but I'll provide in my context, the experience that we have, sure. With artificial intelligence, actually now it's like we have so much that we need to fight against, but I was trying to look at an angle of the issue of integrity and ethical consideration when it comes to research. Like if we have these research training, research seminars that during, let's say, PhD studies, trying to emphasize on ethical and integrity issues when it comes to research. I think this could also be one of the ways to bring awareness, not to do that as well, because I remember during my PhD studies, we had a scientific, we called it a scientific writing research seminar, and through that we were taken through the process on how to write scientific research papers. And one of the components was about ethical and integrity issues. So we were taken very thorough, like how should the process be? Why should you not do that? And if it is done, then what should be the repercussions? But again, when it comes to institutions, I know there are some institutions that support their faculty member to publish into these, we call them predatory journals. But I think it is the role now of the institution. For instance, in my university, you cannot, they don't accept some of the journals that they don't believe that they have a quality that stands for their standards. So I think it is the role also of the institutions to set standards, like do we allow our people to publish in predatory journals? If not, then are there screening mechanisms on not doing it? So we have standards like in the University of Dar es Salaam. Again, we have a list of journals. Where should you publish? Where should not publish? So if you have published in those kind of journals, that means it is for your own sake, but if it is for academic contribution, then you have the standards that you have to follow. And these try to ensure that there's integrity and ethical issues when it comes to publication. So I think this is my take that I would wish to contribute regarding to this kind of issue.
Hey, thank you both, Olaf and Teresa. And you've stimulated quite a few comments, I think, in the Q&A, as well as, well, I guess that everybody's focused on the Q&A, which I appreciate very much. And I'm trying to scan through these and think about how some of them fit together, these questions, as I've done all along. And I think, you know, the one, there's a thread, a common thread that maybe you can both talk a little bit about, and that's funding. Right. And, you know, there was also a comment or a question about salaries. And I think that's not unrelated to funding, obviously. But maybe you could comment on that, Olaf and Teresa, on the question of funding and how it aligns with the needs of African institutions and their aspirations.
I mean, of course, funding is a huge issue, and many of the issues that we have been discussing today are somehow related to resources or the lack of resources. If there were more resources, then people would have time to do research after their PhD, and they would not have to use their spare time, and we would not have to think about incentives for why should they be using their spare time. I think here also the issue of relevance comes in, because if we expect in the long run African governments to finance research and to take over the financing that is now provided from other countries, I think they will probably only do so if they see that the research that we are doing and that our colleagues are doing has societal relevance. Because these governments are, of course, also struggling with resource scarcity, as all governments are doing to some extent. And in order to motivate that money is used to finance the researchers who spend time on collecting data and writing papers, I think it's important to be able to show that the research is able to give something back.
Teresa, you comments on that. Now, can I ask you specifically, in addition to what you were going to say, to talk about sort of the academic career in this context, right? Because there was one of the questions related to salaries, for example, and as a let's take a PhD scholar progresses in the academic career. At times they go through this trajectory, right? They publish in journals early in their career, right? They begin to mentor others later in their career, sort of like the original theory of change, right? With the sandwich programs. But then later in their career, they're also potentially more interested in serving the community and things like that. But then you got this pressure for consulting, which may or may not contribute to that sort of academic career trajectory that helps build the long-term research. I know it's a long question, but I want to make sure that we don't forget about the context and the academic careers when we talk about the funding. Teresa?
Yes, thank you for reframing again the question. And I think I had this like one of the reasons why we are missing out in our academic career is like we have our salaries are not that much attractive, they're insufficient. So you find that after finishing PhD, most of people try to go and find a way on how to make a living, get consultancies and things like that. But again, I was thinking on how to make it better. Then one of the issues that, as Olof said, maybe is try to prioritize the research funding within the policy objectives that we have. And the main issue that could be very specific is to make sure that whatever that we plan for research funding should be straightly forward, be focused on research. And as Olof said as well, we need to come up with research that is going to have impact to the society. So the value for money that is going to be set aside for research need to come out very clear. And as what you have said, to make sure that we stick to our research and our academic careers, it's a truly a great challenge. But I've seen it from one of the professors around here is he could be doing research, but since he developed a research culture in his mind, he could never leave any consultants without any research paper along with it. So it's like, yes, you can go ahead and do the consultants, but then you need to have that mindset that will transform that particular consultants into a research paper and make a contribution. So I have just learned from one of the professors, and this is something that I feel like every time now I am into a consultant or in any other activity that involve, let's say, the collection of data and any kind of report, then I think about what kind of paper should I come out with from out of this one. So if you try to do that, that means you are still going to do the rest of the activities that you wish to do. But again, you're back to the research activities and building on the culture that maybe that we're missing out of that.
It's amazing what we've covered in this webinar. I'm thinking back and trying to wrap my arms around this. Everything from, the skills of a PhD researcher and the sort of the theory of change regarding developing those skills and how that translates into impact, but also the linkages that we can create between scholars in a school, but also across schools and across countries. We talked quite a bit about broadening our view about what research looks like in business schools, and not just thinking about publications in journals, and not just thinking about more applied kinds of research, but more impactful kinds of research. Talked a little bit about investment and what kinds of funds are needed to invest in developing quality research, developing impact, and how that could lead to stronger research cultures and more well-defined career path for academic scholars. Thank you so much, Olaf and Teresa, for your contributions to this set of questions, which are, at least for the Global Business School Network, we're about improving access to quality management education for development, for developing countries. And, I'm old school. I think research drives teaching, right? And unless we think about stewarding the research models that are most relevant for sub-Saharan Africa, we'll forever struggle about trying to understand the kinds of skills and education necessary in business to make a bigger difference moving forward. So I want to thank you both for a wonderful conversation, and thank AFAM for working together with the Global Business School Network to offer these discussions, these conversations for the community. And I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Emma, for keeping us going here. Teresa, Olaf, do you want to say any last remarks? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. I mean, we have been thinking about these topics for a long time, and it has been great to share them with a bigger audience.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Teresa.
similarly, I'm very grateful for the opportunity and for the network that we have. I know that we met in Cairo, Egypt for the GBSN Beyond, and I think now we are going beyond whatever that we have just done. So I'm looking forward to work more with you and to build that research culture among us, and especially the African countries, building up the careers in research.
Perfect. And thank you for joining us in Egypt. And I'll see you both hopefully very soon in
Thank you.
Africa. Okay. Bye-bye.